Well, our team coverage of the lead up to Monday's inauguration and its historical significance continues with my conversation with Quorum Call publisher Sean Ashley.
Sean, let's begin with an historical overview. In, say, the last 50 years, two-term governors have been the norm in Oklahoma, haven't they, rather than one term?
Governor Kevin Stitt will be the fifth governor to serve 2 consecutive terms. Now, keep in mind, Oklahoma governors were prohibited from serving 2 consecutive terms until the mid-1960s, when voters approved a constitutional amendment permitting them to do so. Since that time, 4 other governors, Governor George Nye, Governor Frank Keating, Governor Brad Henry, and Governor Mary Fallin have served back-to-back terms. Henry Bellman, who was first elected in 1962, also served a second term from 1986 to 1991.
So given that list, do governors tend to govern differently in their second term when there's not another election to look forward to?
I think they do, and the reason is probably pretty simple. They no longer have to worry about re-election and building the foundation for their re-election bid. But at the same time, they can use that foundation that they set up in their first term as the basis for policy proposals in their second.
Sean, give us an example of a couple of governors who haven't suffered from lame duck syndrome, who actually maybe had better second terms than they had first terms.
I think Governor Frank Keating may be one example. Keating won approval of the first reduction of the individual income tax in 1998, the last year of his first term. And that set the stage for Keating to call for further income tax reductions in his second term, as well as to start the discussion of broader changes to the state's tax system. Many of those proposals, such as expanding the sales tax to services, did not come to fruition, but they are still being talked about today. And in fact, we'll probably have some of those discussions in this legislative session. Governor Mary Fallin is another. In her second inaugural speech, Fallin talked about tackling issues of what she called over-incarceration. Fallin created the Oklahoma Justice Reform Task Force that produced a series of recommendations that resulted in a criminal justice reform package passed by legislators and signed by her. Subsequent efforts were not so successful. And of course, we can't forget about Governor Henry Bellman, who served 2 non-consecutive terms. It was during his second term that perhaps one of the most well-known education reform and funding measures in state history was passed, House Bill 1017.
Okay, Sean, so let's reverse that. Any governors who clearly had a better first term than a second term?
Well, perhaps that title falls to Governor Brad Henry, but that was probably more the result of the changing political landscape than anything else. Henry saw the House flip from Democrat to Republican control halfway through his first term, and the Senate moved from Democrat control to split control in the first 2 years of his second term, and then ultimately Republican control in the last 2 years of his second term, giving Republicans control of both chambers. In 2008, for example, Henry vetoed an anti-abortion measure which required women to get an ultrasound before having an abortion. That veto was overridden, and it was the first veto override in Oklahoma since 1994, when Governor David Walters was in office.
Sean, a final question. What about inaugural addresses? Among Oklahoma governors, who's regarded as being perhaps the best speaker, someone who could really deliver a fine address, a good orator?
It's really hard to say. Personally, I'm kind of a fan of Governor Kevin Stitt's first inaugural address. He was a political newcomer, and I think he did a good job of introducing himself to Oklahomans and providing an overview of his political philosophy and attitude. Of course, he faces a new challenge on Monday. He's been governor for 4 years. We know him. We know his policy priorities. We know his assets, and we know his faults. So he has to set reasonable expectations for his second term, and his second inaugural speech is a good place to do that.
We're looking forward to seeing what he has to say on Monday. Sean Ashley with Quorum Call. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome.